Claire Westbrook had it all. The perfect marriage, a luxurious life, and a baby on the way. Ethan, her billionaire husband, was the envy of Silicon Valley, the man who seemed to have everything. But behind closed doors, their picture-perfect world was crumbling. When Claire discovered Ethan's betrayal, she didn't confront him, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she did the unthinkable. She filed for divorce without a word, leaving the world and Ethan himself in stunned silence. What happened next would shake their lives to the core, and no one could have predicted the shocking twist that followed. From the outside, Claire and Ethan Westbrook appeared to be the epitome of success. Ethan, a self-made billionaire, had built his empire from the ground up. He was the CEO of a revolutionary tech company that had dominated Silicon Valley, admired for his innovative ideas and sharp business acumen. His name was synonymous with success. Claire, his wife, was a former model who had effortlessly transitioned into a life of luxury and high society. She was the perfect complement to Ethan's high-profile career, elegant, poised, and always impeccably dressed. Their relationship was often described as a love story of the modern age, two brilliant minds coming together to create something far greater than themselves. Their home, an enormous mansion perched on the cliffs of the California coastline, was nothing short of a palace. The views of the ocean were breathtaking, and the house itself was a masterpiece of modern design. Inside, every room exuded luxury, with designer furniture, rare art pieces, and the finest materials money could buy. It was the kind of home that made people feel awestruck upon first glance, the kind of place you'd imagine a couple like Ethan and Claire would live in, a testament to their success both individually and as a couple. The Westbrooks were everywhere. They attended galas, hosted lavish charity events, and were frequently photographed at exclusive resorts, often surrounded by the who's who of Silicon Valley. They were the golden couple, admired not just for their wealth, but for their apparent love and devotion to each other. They had been married for 5 years, and in the public eye, their relationship seemed like a fairy tale. Claire had stepped away from her modeling career shortly after their wedding, choosing instead to focus on family. She was content in the role of doting wife and socialite, attending charity functions and being the perfect partner to Ethan's busy, high-profile life. They had been trying to start a family for months, and when Claire found out she was pregnant with their first child, it seemed like the final piece to complete their perfect life. Everyone knew Claire was glowing with happiness, and Ethan couldn't have been prouder. The media was quick to report the news, celebrating their impending parenthood as another milestone in their flawless relationship. But beneath the polished surface, not everything was as ideal as it appeared. Over the past few months, there had been subtle shifts in the dynamic between them. Ethan, always busy with his company's demanding schedule, had started spending more and more time away from home. Claire had noticed the late nights, the unanswered phone calls, and the distracted air he wore when he was around her. She tried to brush it off as stress from work, knowing how important his company was to him. But even so, a lingering feeling of unease had begun to settle inside her. The changes were small at first, little things like him forgetting their anniversary or being less engaged when they were together, but they built up over time. Despite the perfect public image they projected, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan's behavior had become unpredictable, and it left her questioning whether their seemingly flawless marriage was as secure as she had once believed. Yet, in the world they lived in, filled with endless social events and the pressure to maintain appearances, Claire didn't want to believe that the foundation of their perfect life could be crumbling. She kept her doubts to herself, refusing to acknowledge the possibility that the life they had worked so hard to build could be anything but flawless. But in her gut she knew that something was about to change, and not for the better. It was a quiet afternoon when everything changed for Claire. She had always been an intuitive person, able to read the smallest shifts in the world around her, especially when it came to her marriage. Over the past few weeks, Ethan had been more distant than usual. He had come home late most nights, often too tired or distracted to spend time with her. Even when he was at home, his mind seemed to be elsewhere, constantly checking his phone. His attention divided between work and an unknown source of stress. But it wasn't just his behavior that had started to unsettle her. There was a growing sense of distance, a coldness in the air that hadn't been there before. One evening, Claire had decided to make dinner alone. Ethan had sent a quick text, saying he'd be home late again due to a business meeting. With the baby on the way, Claire couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. She had grown accustomed to the idea of having dinner together, sharing their days, but now it seemed like that was no longer part of their routine. She prepared a simple meal for herself, the soft hum of the kitchen's lights filling the silence of the house. It was then that she noticed Ethan's phone left on the kitchen counter. He had been more careful lately, but there it was, face up and not in his usual spot by the door. A small thought flickered in Claire's mind, almost too quiet to acknowledge at first. She knew she shouldn't snoop. She trusted Ethan, or at least she had. But something in her tugged at her. Maybe it was the growing sense of unease, or perhaps the small, nagging feeling that something wasn't right. She told herself she would just glance at it for a second, nothing more. When she picked it up, the screen illuminated with a series of messages that caught her eye immediately. The texts weren't just casual. There was an intimacy in the words that sent a chill down her spine. They were from someone named Jenna, a name Claire didn't recognize. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the conversation. The tone of the text was flirtatious, even suggestive, and as Claire read on, the shock began to settle in. These weren't just friendly messages, they were personal, intimate exchanges that clearly went far beyond simple conversation. Images followed, ones that Claire couldn't quite bring herself to look at for long, but the captions told her all she needed to know. Her stomach turned as she realized that Ethan had been seeing this woman for months. The messages were full of promises, plans, and inside jokes, an entire world that Claire had been completely unaware of. Jenna wasn't just a random fling. She had become a part of Ethan's life in a way that Claire hadn't been for some time. The deeper Claire scrolled, the more it became clear that this affair had been happening under her nose for longer than she'd ever suspected. Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of the betrayal settled in. This wasn't a one-time mistake. Ethan had been hiding an entire side of his life from her, a life filled with secrets and lies. And yet, despite the rush of anger and disbelief that threatened to overwhelm her, Claire didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't immediately confront him. Instead, she felt an eerie calmness take over. There was no need for confrontation. The evidence was right there, in front of her. Ethan had made his choice. He had already crossed a line, and now Claire would have to decide what her next steps would be. But one thing was clear. The perfect life she had built with Ethan, the life everyone envied, was nothing but an illusion. Claire placed the phone back on the counter, her hands steady despite the turmoil inside her. The dinner she had made sat cold on the table, but she had lost her appetite long ago. She didn't feel sadness or anger, not yet. What she felt was a sense of clarity. She didn't need to confront Ethan right away. She didn't need the drama. She just needed to act. The next few weeks would change everything. In the days following her discovery, Claire's life fell into a strange kind of quiet. She didn't confront Ethan, nor did she give any outward sign that something was wrong. On the surface, everything seemed as normal as it had always been. Ethan continued his routine of late-night meetings and business calls, and Claire went about her day as if nothing had changed. But inside, everything was different. Each moment felt heavy with the weight of her newfound knowledge, and though she never said a word, her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. What should she do next? How could she move forward when everything she thought she knew was a lie? Ethan, blissfully unaware of Claire's silent discovery, seemed as distant as ever. He continued to be consumed by his work, his focus fixed solely on his company and its growth. He was rarely home, and when he was, Claire noticed his increasing detachment. He was distracted, quick to retreat into his phone or laptop, always with a vague excuse about needing to wrap up important matters. But Claire wasn't fooled. She knew exactly where his attention was, on Jenna. It was painfully obvious, even in his attempts to hide it. The messages, the images. His affair wasn't just a momentary lapse. It was an ongoing betrayal, one he was clearly committed to. Though the tension between them grew, Claire didn't let it show. She had always been an expert in maintaining appearances, and now, more than ever, she was determined to keep up the facade. She knew that once the truth came out, once she made a decision, everything would change. But until then, she would keep everything quiet, not just from Ethan, but from everyone else. Their friends, their family, the people in their social circle, all of them believed in the perfect marriage of Claire and Ethan. They would never see it coming. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them became deafening. Ethan's late nights turned into more frequent absences, often citing business trips or last-minute meetings. Claire found herself in a routine of loneliness, filling the void with long walks by the ocean or quiet evenings in front of the TV. She spent hours in their sprawling home, feeling the emptiness of it more with each passing day. It wasn't just the house that felt empty, it was her heart. Ethan's absence wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and it left Claire with a sense of isolation she hadn't anticipated. She couldn't remember the last time they'd shared a real conversation, or the last time they'd laughed together. Despite everything, Claire's resolve remained. She was no longer the woman who would beg for attention or affection. She wasn't going to plead with Ethan to come home, to fix their marriage. The truth was, she had already begun to accept that their marriage was beyond repair. She could feel the growing divide between them, and it had become clear to her that no amount of words or effort would change Ethan's actions. His betrayal had cut too deep. Claire spent the following weeks in a quiet state of preparation. She didn't talk to anyone about what was happening, but she began making plans. She met with a divorce attorney, someone with a reputation for handling high-profile, complicated cases. She didn't need a drawn-out public battle. She wanted a clean break, a new beginning far from the world she and Ethan had built together. She made careful decisions about what she wanted: full custody of the child, a substantial financial settlement, and perhaps most importantly, her independence. She wouldn't let Ethan's affair strip away her sense of self. She knew the divorce would be difficult, but she was ready. The decisions were already made, the papers ready to be signed. The next step was clear. She would file for divorce, and she wouldn't say a word. The moment Claire decided to file for divorce, it wasn't driven by anger or a desire for revenge. It was a decision rooted in clarity, in the quiet acceptance of what her life had become. For weeks, she had toyed with the idea of confronting Ethan, of demanding answers or an apology. But with every passing day, she realized that confrontation would do nothing to change the truth. Ethan had made his choice, and the life they once shared was nothing more than a broken illusion. The trust was gone, replaced by an emptiness that no amount of words could fill. Claire had always been a woman of few words. She didn't need drama, didn't need the spectacle of a confrontation. The betrayal had cut deep, but she refused to let it define her. She had been hurt, yes, but she wasn't about to become a victim of her circumstances. The life she had, built with Ethan, the life everyone envied, was no longer hers. It was time to take back control, and she would do it quietly, without fanfare. She scheduled a meeting with her lawyer, one who specialized in high-net-worth divorces, and went over every detail meticulously. The assets were vast, and Claire knew she had to protect her future. There was no question about custody of the child. She would have full custody. Ethan had never been as present in their marriage as she had hoped, and she knew that his work would only continue to pull him further away. As for the financial settlement, Claire didn't care about wealth for wealth's sake. She wanted what was fair, what was right. Ethan's betrayal would not cost her her dignity. He would pay, but she wouldn't let it be about revenge. She was walking away, and that was all that mattered. In the days that followed, Claire remained outwardly calm. She went about her daily routine, attending meetings, managing her social obligations, and preparing for the arrival of their child. Her friends and family continued to see the Claire they knew, the poised, composed woman who never let anything disrupt her life. They had no idea that behind the scenes she was making preparations for the end of her marriage. They didn't know about the phone call she had made to the lawyer or the paperwork sitting quietly on her desk, ready to be signed. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not yet. Ethan, on the other hand, remained blissfully ignorant. He continued to go about his business, assuming everything was as it had always been. His world hadn't changed. He was still wrapped up in his company, his image, and his ongoing affair with Jenna. Claire's silence was the only indication that something was off, but even that was something Ethan couldn't bring himself to question. He thought he had it all under control. He had no idea that Claire had already made the decision to leave him, and that she had already started the process that would dissolve everything they had built together. The day Claire signed the divorce papers, it was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The decision was made. She had taken the first step toward her new life, one that didn't involve Ethan or the shadow of betrayal that had hung over them for so long. She handed the papers to her lawyer, who would file them on her behalf. There would be no shouting, no public confrontation. She wouldn't allow herself to be dragged into a spectacle. It was all business now. A clean break. When the day finally came to hand the papers to Ethan, it was almost anticlimactic. Claire had prepared herself for this moment. But when she finally placed the divorce documents in front of him, she didn't say a word. No explanations, no justifications. She had made her choice, and it was final. Ethan, still unaware of the storm that had been brewing beneath the surface, looked at her with confusion. His mind struggled to process what was happening, but Claire didn't give him the chance to ask questions or beg for reconciliation. She simply stood there, silently watching as he stared down at the papers, realization slowly dawning on him. Claire turned away, leaving him there, alone with the wreckage of their marriage. There was no need for words, no need for further explanation. She had already moved on, and now it was time for Ethan to face the consequences of his actions. The weeks that followed Claire's decision to file for divorce were a whirlwind, but not in the way anyone might expect. The media, once fascinated by the perfect life of the Westbrooks, quickly picked up on the news. Headlines splashed across gossip columns and tabloids, questioning what had happened between the seemingly perfect couple. Ethan, who had been the face of Silicon Valley's success and innovation, was now the subject of scandal. The affair with Jenna, the mistress Claire had discovered, was exposed for the world to see. The details were ugly and raw, but they didn't surprise Claire. Ethan's betrayal had been laid bare for everyone to judge, and she felt no need to participate in that judgment. Ethan, on the other hand, found himself scrambling to control the damage. His public image, carefully constructed over the years, began to crumble. The scandal of his affair with Jenna, paired with the sudden divorce, was too much for his carefully curated life. He gave a few interviews trying to explain himself, to salvage what remained of his reputation, but nothing could undo the damage. People who had once admired him now questioned his integrity, and it wasn't long before the tech world, which had once hailed him as a visionary, turned its back on him. It wasn't just his personal life that was in turmoil. His business was now facing pressure as well. But none of this concerned Claire. While Ethan's world fell apart, Claire quietly embraced the next chapter of her life. She moved out of their grand mansion and into a smaller, more private home by the coast. It wasn't the sprawling estate she had once lived in, but it felt like a new beginning. The space was peaceful, and it gave her the solitude she needed to focus on herself and her unborn child. The transition was smooth. She didn't have to face a media frenzy, and she didn't have to explain herself to anyone. She had already made her peace with her decisions, and now she was focused on the future. The birth of her child was a moment of pure joy. For the first time in months, Claire felt a sense of calm, a peace she had longed for. She didn't have to share the moment with anyone except the baby she had carried, the child who would become her entire world. The bond between mother and child was immediate, and it was clear that Claire's focus had shifted entirely. She didn't need Ethan's approval, nor did she need his presence. She had her own strength now. In the months that followed, Claire became more involved in her community, focusing on charity work and personal growth. She used her experience as a catalyst to empower others, especially women who had found themselves in difficult situations. She spoke at events about resilience, about finding strength even in the darkest of times. But she did so quietly, never seeking attention, always maintaining her privacy. Her life had been turned upside down, but she had rebuilt it on her own terms. She was no longer the woman defined by her marriage to Ethan Westbrook. She was Claire, the woman who had risen from betrayal and walked away stronger than ever. Ethan, meanwhile, continued his downward spiral. Jenna, who had once been the object of his affection, disappeared from the public eye just as quickly as she had entered it. Their brief affair had fizzled out, and Ethan found himself alone, facing the aftermath of his actions. No amount of wealth or fame could undo the damage he had caused. His career, which had once been thriving, was now uncertain, and he struggled to regain the public's trust. But for Claire it didn't matter. She had moved on, and with each passing day, her life grew richer with purpose and self-assurance. She had let go of the past, focusing only on the future that lay ahead. As time went on, Claire continued to build the life she had always deserved. One filled with peace, independence, and, most importantly, a deep sense of fulfillment. The woman who had once been part of the Westbrooks' perfect image had found something far more valuable: herself. And that was enough.